Welcome to Cassandra Lunch number 83. Today's topic is going to be on Aiven Managed Cassandra, and I will be giving the talk on that. I'm an engineer here at Anant. Our co-organizers for this event are Rahul, myself, and Josh. We actively look out for any guest speakers or sponsors. If you guys would like to give a talk at Cassandra Lunch or even our sister lunch, Data Engineers Lunch, or help sponsor one of the two events, you can reach out to myself or Josh. There will be the easiest to get into touch with. We are a part of Data Community DC. Data Community DC believes in an inclusive environment. So no matter your race, gender, sexual orientation, everyone is welcome, and we expect respect to be given to all. So Data Community DC is also built up of a bunch of different organizations. Our sister lunch is held on Data Wranglers DC. So if you're interested in more events around the DC area, but again, nowadays everything's online, you can find out more at events.datacommunitydc.org, or you can also check out their socials as well. So what do we cover here at Cassandra Lunch? So we cover anything that is Cassandra, talks Cassandra, is a variant, or uses CQL, or anything in the ecosystem that talks with and plays well with Cassandra. So here at Anant, we focus on Cassandra, Spark, and Kafka. And so a lot of times, some of our discussions include related to Cassandra and Spark, or Cassandra and Kafka, or orchestration tools like Airflow and Cassandra. So if you are interested in learning more, we're always open to expanding our topic base. So if you have any suggestions about topics, feel free to drop them as a comment on the YouTube video, and we'll add that to the backlog so that way they can get covered. So this is a time where if anyone's new, they want to say hi, but just looking through the participants here on the Zoom, looks like everyone's a regular, so we'll move on. Group rules: if you have a question, ask it. Be polite and courteous to others. This is a community, so if you have more knowledge on a topic, or you want to add something to the conversation, or if you have a question, feel free to ask it. It doesn't have to be in the chat. You could potentially raise your hand and the caller can speak on you, but please be courteous to the speaker's preferences in terms of questions. We will get to that when we hand over to the guest speaker. And again, this is a community, so please do share what you know with us. Here at Anant, we design, build, and manage global real-time data platforms surrounding Cassandra, Spark, and Kafka, as mentioned previously. DataStax is a partner and a sponsor. GW University also is a sponsor. They help us have physical venue space when we do in-person events. We also have some institutional or organizational sponsors. Any jobs, meetup, hackathons, conferences, etc., any announcements people in the audience have, they want to talk about any upcoming events. I know Peter Skilla is having a
yeah, we got Scylla Summit coming up. That'll be February 9th and 10th. And you can register online. It's totally online and free. It's 2 days, February 9th and 10th. And it will be at scilladb.com/summit. I'll put that in the chat.
Great. And Josh, if you don't mind dropping that to the YouTube chat as well, so anyone that's watching on YouTube can sign up for that as well. All right, so Anant is hiring. We are hiring full-time or part-time positions, whether that be a data platform operator, engineer, or an architect. You can find out more at careers.anant.us. Some upcoming Cassandra events, as Peter mentioned, Skilla has their event in early February, but we also have Cassandra lunches every Wednesday at noon Eastern currently, but in the future, and I think the near future, we are looking at switching some days, but we'll keep everyone up to date on socials when that happens. Same with Data Engineers Lunch. We are looking to expand to a more global audience, so we might switch around some time so that way people can watch live, whether they be in Europe or Asia, or even Australia, just to make it more accessible to everyone around the world. You can find out more about our events at us/events. So all of these Cassandra videos are available on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/AnantCorp. And you can find all the previous Cassandra lunches we've held up until Cassandra Lunch 10 is around the time we started to record and put them out on YouTube. So everything from 10 to 83 now will be available on YouTube. Same thing goes for our sister data engineers lunch videos. And Cassandra.Link should be your #1 resource for all things Cassandra. This is a website that uses hand-curated resources from our team here at Anant and makes them available to people online. So if you have any questions or if you're looking for resources regarding Cassandra, or as well as anything that talks or plays well with Cassandra, like Spark, Kafka, Scala, you can find resources on Cassandra.Link. So with that, we will go ahead and move over to the presentation aspect of today's talk. Let me know if you guys can still see the new slide deck.
Yep.
Good.
So today's talk is going to be on Aiven Managed Cassandra. So I know last week we talked about Instacluster Managed Cassandra. So we're just covering some of the other options out there. I know Peter's going to talk about Scala. We actually used Scala Cloud previously in one of our other demos. So just looking at other potential managed options out there. We've done some talks, I think, on key spaces and Cosmos DB. So if you're interested in those, you can also find those on our YouTube channel. But again, today we're going to focus on Aiven's Managed Cassandra offering and show how we can connect to it with Node.js and CQLSH. So just as a preface, I don't have any preferences in terms of if you have any questions or you would like to add anything, feel free to speak up. Or if you're more comfortable, you can drop it to the chat. I have my chat window open. So when we get to a good stopping point or a pivot point, we can read over the chat as well. But if you're not familiar with what Aiven Managed Cassandra is, it's a fully managed Cassandra service. So it primarily uses open source Cassandra. So it doesn't have any like enterprise level or modifications, something like Scala Enterprise or DataStax Enterprise would have. So we'll take a look at that once we get to the demo portion, and we'll go through the UI. I've already set up my cluster, and we'll talk about that once we get there. But when you do it, you can choose where you want to deploy it to, whether that be AWS, GCP, Azure, DO Cloud, or another one, UpCloud. I'm not super familiar with UpCloud, but they do provide that as an option. Some of the bells and whistles that they have with their managed service is that they have automatic backups. So they do backups on every 24-hour cycle. You can configure that within the UI, and you can also restore via the latest backup. They do have support. So if you're in the process of migrating from potentially like self-managed Cassandra on your own hardware, they do have support for like SS table loader. So if you want to move your data that way, you can. They also have support for Terraform. So if you use an automation tool like Terraform to help manage your infrastructure, they make it easy to do that. They also allow for VPC peering, so you can access your Aiven from other clouds like AWS, GCP, or Azure private networks. And obviously with any cloud service, you always have that 99% SLA uptime, but they also have additional support that you have access to when you have a managed offering. And one of the cool things that I noticed on their UI, and we'll take a look at it once we get to it, is that they have kind of like a one-click upgrade. So when I was setting up my demo cluster, there were two options for Cassandra. There was Cassandra 3 and then there was Cassandra 4. So currently I just picked Cassandra 3, but once we get to the UI, you can see there's actually like a one-click upgrade. Obviously there might be some more steps in between of just upgrading it. So you have to make sure all of your compatibilities are correct. But in terms of just upgrading 3 to 4, there's a way to do it within the UI itself, which was pretty cool. So they do offer a no credit card free trial, which was pretty nice in helping set up and spin up this. So basically it's like free for 30 days, but essentially you have like 300 credits that you can use over those 30 days. And if you want some more, like a quick start for how to get started with their managed Cassandra, I have a link here. It'll be available once the slide share goes up, and then that will be attached to the YouTube description as well. So some of the additional bells and whistles that Aiven Managed Cassandra has is you can integrate / add some features to your instance. So most of the integrations that they allow are mainly like logs and activity monitoring. So like you can see here, like Kafka logs, Google Cloud logging, Elasticsearch, metrics, Prometheus, Datadog for monitoring, and then CloudWatch and CloudWatch logs. So it was a little limited in terms of like native integration, but potentially if you talk to them or talk to sales or support, potentially there are other ways you can integrate other tools. But this just makes it so you can do it directly in the UI off the jump. So at this point, we'll move on to the demo portion, but I will pause if anyone has any questions. All right, doesn't look like there's any questions. So today's demo is going to be done on Gitpod. So I had originally been scheduled to speak next week, but obviously some things get moved around, so I got pushed forward. So the demo, unfortunately, today is not super involved. However, it is to show you and introduce you to Aiven Managed Cassandra if you're not familiar with it, but then also show you how easy it is to connect to it via code. We'll be using the Node.js and the Cassandra driver that way, but you can also use the Cassandra driver because it's the DataStax one. So as long as you use the proper certs and the credentials, it's pretty much the same, whether you're using Node, Python, Java, etc. So we'll show you using one of their examples of how to connect to it. So what that example will do, it'll do a client execute. So it'll just run a CQL statement and create a key space and then insert one row into that. And then we'll also use the CQLSH I had previously used for my DataStax and Astra connecting to it via CQLSH. We could actually pivot that to then use the CQLSH, but connect to Aiven or other managed services. But obviously each managed service has different methods and authentication. So for example, Astra has like their secure connect bundle, right? And then that has a different flag when you run the command in the CL or in the terminal. For us, we'll be using a CA cert. So we'll be using SSL as a flag. And so we'll show you how to do that. It's pretty simple. And we can go ahead and get started. So first things first is we are going to take a look at the Aiven UI. So I spun this up yesterday, and after playing around with it for a while, I went ahead and stopped it or powered it off and then powered it back on. But obviously, as mentioned, we got $300 of credits. They have not asked for a credit card. So we still have quote unquote like the month trial. So if you want to play with it, it was pretty simple to set up because you would just go to the managed Cassandra, and then when you hit free trial, you can pick and choose which cloud you want to deploy to, which region you want to say it is. So going through the UI, there's a couple things that are here. So we have our service URI, which is essentially our hostname and port. So this will be used when we're connecting to it, or connecting via the node code as well as the CQLSH. The data center, that's going to be used for the node code. And then the username and password, you can obviously generate more by going into the members section, but we're just going to use the admin credentials that they have here. And as mentioned before, we have the CA cert, which we can download, and then we'll need to import that into wherever we're using it. For example, we're using it on Gitpod, so we'll just drag and drop it in and then give it the path to the cert. So just some of the bells and whistles that the UI offers. There's some stuff where you can like protect against termination, which is pretty interesting. Again, here's the one click upgrade that we mentioned previously. So there's like the upgrade available. Let me do a quick refresh. So if you scroll down, let's go here, upgrade available. So if you see here, we can upgrade from Cassandra 3 to Cassandra 4. But they do note that reverting back to the old version is not possible once the upgrade has been started. So I don't know if that means after the fact. So if you want to go down from 4 to 3, if they allow that, or it just means you can't edit the process once that's been started. So maybe if that's something you're interested in, you can find out more. So service plan, again, you can change your plan. So right now the free trial uses 2 CPU, 15 GB RAM, 1320 GB storage with 3 node high availabilities. And you can obviously change that, but that might affect your free trial plan. You might just burn through credits faster depending on what you're doing. And then also, which I thought was pretty interesting, is you can make it's pretty easy to switch your cloud from whatever you're using. So like right now I'm on AWS East 1, but you can switch between, as mentioned, Google Cloud, Azure, DigitalOcean, and then UpCloud. But again, like depending on when you're setting up your free trial, when I was looking at it, say if it preset me to like GCP Cloud, right? And the price was like $1,300 a month. And I was like, oh, okay, let me look at the other options. So depending on what cloud you're using, it looks like AWS and DigitalOcean are the cheaper options for the free trial. But again, you're not really paying anything. But just from the Aiven connection, maybe that might be some of the money stuff in the background, or just in general pricing for clouds for Cassandra or for these type of machines, what it might be. So that's just something to look into if you're interested in. And again, coming back to the service integrations, this is where we mentioned the stuff about like the logs and metrics integration. So this makes it easy so you can do it directly in the UI. Obviously, you'll have to have other stuff running elsewhere. So if you have like Elasticsearch deployed somewhere, you can connect it. But making it easy so that you can do it directly in the UI. And here they do automatic maintenance. So I actually had to change this because like when I restarted my nodes, I restarted the cluster, it was Wednesday. And I was like, wait, I'll need this cluster. So let me move this maintenance. So it was very easy to do. So when you hit change, you just change it to whatever day of the week you want and whatever time you want it to start at, which is pretty easy. And again, some of the allowed IP addresses, if you want to talk to, if you have some firewall stuff that you need to manage, you can just easily add allowed IP addresses into Aiven. And then you can see some additional event information like creation time. And then we can also add some configuration options if we need them, but we don't need it right now. Looking at metrics, we have hourly, daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly metrics that we can see. So like CPU usage, disk usage, IO, and load. If you go into logs, we can see the Cassandra logs specifically. So for example, when we run the client execute, create key space, and then load in a record, if we come back to this logs, we'll see that the key space got created. But I'm now just realizing my key space is already there. So I might edit the statement to drop the key space and then, or I'll just create a new key space. Sorry, I just had a brain fart. So now if we go into users again, we have the admin user, which automatically gets created into when you deploy for the first time, but then you can also add additional users. And then backups, you can see backups and then fork and restore based on what we discussed previously. But again, you can also see events, which is pretty cool. So you can see what time stuff gets powered down, what time it gets powered on, when the maintenance window is. So if you run into an issue, you can see potentially, oh, okay, maintenance happened here. Let's break down what changed within the timeline. So members, again, VPC. So again, if you want to do VPC peering, you can do it via the VPC section here. Integrations, it's the same thing with what we saw previously in the services section. Billing, you can obviously just, this won't be any different because it's credit card free and they give you X amount of tokens. And then additional settings, you can set technical emails, and then billing reference tags if you're using it as a paid service. So now what we can do is we can go into our first repo, which is the Aiven example. So what's going to happen here is essentially we're going to use the Cassandra driver, and we are going to load in our username and password, the ABN admin ones that were already created. And then we are going to change our contact points to the URI that's available in the UI. Local data center, we can keep it as Aiven, and then SSL option. So again, as mentioned, this is where we'll need to have our cert file. And then so we're just going to create a new key space and then just make some edits to where it's going to be probably just a different key space. We can keep everything else the same. So what we are going to do here is just open this on Gitpod. Just going to take a couple seconds. All right, now we are open. So this will open root. So we're just going to cd into Cassandra and then Node.js. So again, they have examples for C#, Go, Java, Node.js, Python. So again, it's based on the DataStax Cassandra drivers. So whatever languages you're working in, it's pretty much the same. There are just differences, say like for, let's go to Python or the Cassandra example. So like their auth code is obviously different, but they have a little bit of changes where they have like cert request, cert required versus Node.js is just pointing to the path of the file. So what we're going to do here is we are going to load, or at least drag and drop our CA cert. Let me actually download this real quick, just in case potentially changed when I restarted. So what I'm going to do is drag and drop this into the node directory, and then I'm going to rename it ca.pem. So now what we're going to do is update our password here. And obviously I'm going to destroy this cluster once this demo is done. Let's go to the service URI, essentially the host name and port. So we're just going to paste that into here. And then data center will keep the same. And then for here, we'll just need to give this the path. So we'll copy the path, update this. And then going down here, actually, while we're doing that, I'm just going to do an npm to install any packages. So here we are going to change this to demo key space. And so essentially this is doing is saying create key space, replication, network topology strategy, and then I think RF of 3 essentially. And then we're going to use that again, because this is just a CQL statement, create a table, and then insert in 2 values, 1, 2, 3. And because we're using prepared statements, we have to say it's prepared because we're using these question marks. And then we're just going to select it. So once this runs, essentially what's going to happen is just going to output to the terminal the record, which will just be 1, 2, 3, hello world. And so when we do this, if I just save this and then run JS, All right, so we see back a row ID equals whatever message hello world, and then it did our clients shut down. And if there was an error, it would have shown us the error in the console. So now if we go back to Aiven, if we look at the logs, we can actually see it says create new key space, demo key space. And then if we look at the next portion where it says create new table, and then we should see a section for inserting. But yeah, essentially, if you want to look at the logs when you're actually doing development, you can do that as well. Obviously, depending on your use case or team or infrastructure, permission levels obviously might not allow for that. So another way to do that is to use CQLSH. So what we're going to do now is we are going to open up the next repo. Again, this was previously used for DataStax Astra and standalone CQLSH. We're just going to use the standalone CQLSH part and convert it to use, or at least just the command we're going to use is going to use CQLSH. And we are going to connect to the Aiven cluster that we have. So once this loads, there we go. So first things first is we are going to get our CA cert, and we are going to drag and drop that into our directory, just rename it ca.pem. And so what we're doing now is we are going to, actually there looks like there's a question in the chat. Does the UI let you see the data in the database? So good question. So when I was trying to, essentially when I was testing and trying to see my data, when I looked through the UI, there was no way to visualize my data, right? Like for example, Astra has the CQLSH terminal directly in one of their views. Skillet Cloud has like a command that they give you where you can just copy and paste, and then that will run a Docker container and connect to your CQLSH. But if I wanted to connect to CQLSH here or look at my data, there's no direct way to do it within the UI. So what I had to do is I had to go into the help and look in their docs just for how to connect to it. And so that's how I found this command that we're about to run. So what I'm going to do is copy and paste this. Actually, let me cd into CQLSH, cd into bin. So let me go ahead and paste this. So what this command is doing is essentially saying the SSL version we're using is TLS v1_2, and then we're pointing to the cert file, which is the ca.pem, and we're saying this is the path to it. And so the actual CQLSH, we're saying flag SSL because that's the version that we're using. And then username, password, obviously those are just copy and pasted from the UI. And then we give it the host name and then the port. And so now we're able to connect to it via CQLSH. So now if I do a describe key spaces, we should see our demo key space, which we do, right? And then if I do select all from demo key space, we should get back our ID 123 and a hello world. The same exact thing we got back from what we created via the Node.js. So obviously I wanted to do more with the demo, but with time constraints, I was had my hands tied a little bit, but I did show you what I did want to show you, how to connect to it via code and how to connect to Aiven via CQLSH. That does wrap up my demo portion. If anyone has any questions while I have my screen shared, feel free to drop them or speak up. So there is a question in the chat. What are some of the other features that they offer that you weren't able to get to in time? So it's less about features, more about building out a more fleshed out demo, right? So like previously, when we had our Instacluster and Node.js demo, Stefan got that to work with the Instacluster and Node.js repo that he built. I can try my hand at it, so when the blog goes up, I can give instructions for that. I just didn't have the ability to get that done. But in terms of features that they offer that I wasn't able to get into, we essentially covered all they offer, right? Potentially, we can talk about connecting, like something like Datadog or Prometheus, that they have in their UI native integrations for. That could be something we talk about in the blog, but I did cover what I wanted to cover in terms of how to connect to it and how to set it up, and just look through the UI, see what's available, if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thanks. Do you see any advantages to this type of managed Cassandra versus some of the others? Or was it any easier to connect and set up for you than some of the others?
No, I think in comparison to what we saw with the Instacluster, it's more like I would put them into buckets, right? So there's one bucket where it's the open source Cassandra realm, and then there's one bucket where it's like enterprise, CQL compliant, or their version of Cassandra plus more, right? So like Scala and Cosmos and Astra or DataStax and key spaces would kind of fall into that second bucket, versus Aiven and Instacluster would kind of fall into the first bucket of open source. So it depends on like your use case, right? So if you're using open source Cassandra versus a enterprise managed service, then depending on your needs, your ability to migrate, because maybe some of the enterprise services offer some services to help you migrate. Aiven has it has SS table loader support. Stefan, you might know. Do you know if Instacluster mentioned anything about migrating from your, like, say, your hardware setup to the cloud? If Stefan is on, I know he wasn't feeling well. Okay, doesn't look like he's on, but potentially. So that could be one factor, right? Another factor could be is maybe you have scale that you're using Cassandra in the first place, right? And you don't want to change from open source. Then potentially something like Instacluster to Aiven could be an option. But again, it's really depending on your team's use case in the future, right? Because like as Rahul kind of says, like Cassandra is going to be the interplanetary database, right? Because it's kind of the last stop on the road of data, right? You've tried everything else, but nothing scales to what you need. And Cassandra is eventually what people end at when they're at that point, but you don't want to use Cassandra too early because it might not fit your use case. So it really depends on your team, your vision of your company, what kind of data you're working with. And then also if you have the need for the enterprise level offerings that something like DataStax, Scala, Cosmos, or Key Spaces offers you, that makes you take the jump from open source to enterprise, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I know this is Cassandra Lunch, but do they work with any other databases even? Is this?
Yeah. So we can go ahead and just pull that up. So they have a couple different options for their managed offerings. So they have Kafka, Kafka Connect, Mirror Maker, Flink. So streaming related stuff. I'm not super familiar with what M3 is. We can take a look. Cassandra, OpenSearch, Postgres, MySQL, Influx, Grafana. So they do a mix of NoSQL plus SQL, streaming or messaging technologies. Let's see, M3 is a Prometheus monitoring environment. So again, monitoring.
Yeah, it's a Prometheus compatible alternative.
Gotcha. Thank you for the input, Peter. So yeah, so those are some of the other options that they offer. So if you want to like potentially put your whole system to, so if you're like managing Kafka, Spark, and Cassandra all open source on your own, you potentially look into maybe a different service for Cassandra or Spark, or if you're using Databricks already and you're using not Confluent, but open source Kafka or open source Cassandra, and you've put your Cassandra and Kafka onto Aiven or InstaCluster if they offer a Kafka offering, managed Kafka offering. Potentially that could be a use case where you maintain the open source aspects of the technologies that you're more familiar with. And then you put them on here and you connect them through VPC peering to connect it to your Databricks, wherever that's hosted, whether that be on Azure, GCP. I don't know if they can host on AWS, but yeah, so it really depends on your use case. So a lot of times that like we've discussed here, it's like, what's best for you and your team. It might not be best what people are doing or people are, or sorry, that's not the way I want to phrase it. It's that it's one, it's you don't want to reinvent the wheel, and then two, it's do you really have the need for this, right? Like they give you some costing tiers, right? The Aiven or InstaCluster, some or any of the other managed services. Is it really worth it for you at this point in time or whenever you're making this decision, cost benefit or cost ratio to move to a managed service? Like, does it cost less in terms of personnel? But then that comes in the managed cloud aspect, price usually more expensive. So it's all about what is best for you and your team, and taking a look at all the infrastructure that goes into that as well. So there are some integrations that Aiven has, like Terraform. So if you're already using Terraform as an automation tool on your hardware level or your private like structure, that could be something you could use to then modify that and push it to Aiven or any of the other clouds, because Terraform is a pretty popular tool for infrastructure management. Oh, looks like Peter dropped a chat. It looks like M3 actually came out of Uber, so that's pretty cool. I know Uber has a lot of data, so having real-time monitoring is very important to make sure people get to where they're going or get their food.
I don't know if I may have missed it when you were doing your demo. In that UI, does it allow you, like, what kind of options do you have to manage your Cassandra inside of the UI? Can you scale up and down nodes and do that sort of thing, or is it more so just about deploying it?
No, you can do that. You would just need to edit the service plan aspect, right? So like for us, we just used a 3-node HA set with certain configurations, so like 2 CPU, 15 RAM, 1300 GB storage. If we need to adjust that, so again, kind of that pricing model, right? So they have 16, 32, 64, and then depending on what tier you're using, so they have like startup defaults, business defaults, premium defaults. So they all have kind of estimated costs. So these are like 9 nodes, 6 node, 3 nodes. So there might be limitations in terms of how many nodes you could have per cluster. Otherwise, there might be some custom configurations you can have after talking to their sales team or something.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was curious about, because it seems like you have to pay per node almost in their like pricing plans and stuff like that. So it's not like it would automatically scale for you or anything like that.
Yeah, I didn't remember seeing anything regarding auto scaling. So that potentially might be a feature. Let's just take a quick option. So I know a lot of the other managed options have auto scaling, but I didn't see anything in the immediate documentation So maybe that's not part of their offering. So maybe that could be something that pushes you towards an enterprise offering or a different clouds or a different managed offering. So again, that's just another thing that you and your team will need to look at and compare when you're ready to make the switch.
Yeah, it does seem fairly easy to get it connected to everything now. Interesting that it's connected to Astra. I don't know. Would these guys be considered like competitors to DataStax, I guess?
Yeah.
It's still
So
managed Cassandra.
yeah, so again, it's kind of the bucket thing, right? So DataStax it's built on top of open source Cassandra, right? Versus Aiven, which uses open source Cassandra. So it's that thought of, am I only using open source Cassandra? That's all I need to do. Versus something like DataStax and DataStax Enterprise, where they have analytics and search and graph, where they have all these other things built into their enterprise platform that can all talk to each other and set up is pretty much done for you in terms of being able to quickly connect the Spark aspect to the Cassandra aspect. So it's all depending on your use case, right? So there are more configurations. So if you wanted to connect this to your Spark, it'd be more difficult than doing it via just DSE, right?
Yeah, and I did want to point out we do have an article on Cassandra.Link, how to migrate your Cassandra cluster to Aiven using the SS table loader. Where did that? I was going to drop that in the chat in case anyone's interested.
Yeah, so it goes, oh yeah, so I think I skipped over it, but Aiven has a CLI, so that's what this command is using. So it's essentially Aiven service create, your plan, migrate. So it looks like this functionality is somewhat built into the CLI, but you still do have to use CQLSH to manually migrate your schema. So you export it as a CQL file. You create a new key space. And again, this is essentially what we did, right? So instead of actually running a file that they have here using flag F, we just used the SSL cert. So we pointed it to our ca.pem, and then we use CQLSH. Obviously, it's not part of my path, so I did /, and then flag SSL, username, password, and then our host, and then our port. And then essentially what they're doing is exporting the schema and then running that with flag F, and then going down through here. So they use AVN service, so the SS table service that they have built into their CLI. So you got your credentials. So upload the key store Cassandra YAML to each of the nodes. And then run the following command to print the SS table loader command. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So this probably came from their documentation, right? Yeah. So obviously, you can find this directly on Cassandra.Link. If you're searching just for Aiven or even SS table loader, you can find it. So yeah, if you're interested in using SS table loader to migrate your existing Cassandra cluster to Aiven, this resource can be found on Cassandra.Link, and then it's originally sourced from their documentation anyway. And so, yeah, it's pretty interesting. You can do it directly via the CLI. It looks like there are some manual steps in here, but they do have pretty much everything you need to do to make it easy to do it. It probably will just take time in terms of actually migrating your data, depending on how much data you have. Because, right, Obi, I think you're here. Did you give the talk on like migration methods, like the differences between like SS table loader, DS bulk,
Yeah, I don't think I ever did like a comparison one, but I've
Uh,
done a couple of separate talks about SS table loader. I think about like CQL copy probably, DS bulk, and then other projects that manage migrating data via the SS tables directly and stuff like that.
yeah, so I think what we had like talked about, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, is like in terms of like data size efficiency, I think it was like lowest would be CQL copy, and then mid range would probably be like DS bulk, and then like mid to high would probably be like SS table loader. And then if you have like something really, really big, you could use something like the Scala migrator because that uses Spark, and that will be able to like distribute and handle a ton of data. Um, I think that was kind of what we talked about as well.
Yeah, one of the things in there was that like SS table loader and Spark Cassandra connector requires that you have a Spark cluster. So as you get higher up, there are extra requirements as well. And SS table loader and any method that transfers SS tables over directly requires that your clusters have the same topology. So you're sort of making trade-offs as you move up to what you actually need.
Yeah, same or bigger nodes though, because like if you could move the same SS tables over on a bigger node, but if you had to like rebalance to a different number of nodes or smaller nodes, then yeah, you definitely couldn't use SS table loader.
Yeah, it's the cluster organization, the topology that matters rather than the size of your nodes.
Great. Thank you for that clarification. Yeah, so that's obviously another thing. If you're using one of these managed services, something like Aiven, and if you're doing SS table loader, that's obviously a really important point to keep in mind. So obviously that would play into your factor of looking at something like the open source bucket or potentially the enterprise bucket, where they might have tools, other tools and methods to help you do your data migrations and support to do so. But yeah, if anyone else has any other questions or comments, feel free to speak up or drop them in the chat. I'll stop sharing for now, but that should wrap up all that I have for today.
Awesome. Thanks, Arpan. Yeah, thanks, Obi and Peter, for contributing to the discussion. Always appreciate it.
Do you have any comments or questions from the YouTube chat?
Oh, actually, yes. Sorry. Sergeis, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Can you connect using Python instead of Node?
Yes.
Which I believe
So,
we saw.
Yeah, so let me reshare my screen real quick. So if we go into the Aiven docs and we go to Cassandra, and yeah, we took a look at the code itself, but going down here, it's essentially the same. So right, so you just have to import. So depending on your pip, if you have requirements, you can do all your imports of your packages, but you'll need to pull in Cassandra auth, Cassandra cluster, Cassandra policies, and so your auth provider. So again, it's just username, password, SSL options. So again, path to your ca.pem. And so obviously it's not super different from what we had done with the node. It's just, you're just using the Python version of the Cassandra driver. But yes, so the different languages that they've marked here are Python, Go, Java, Node, and C#. So if I just search for the Cassandra driver, let's see. So there might be other drivers you could potentially use. So potentially you could use the C++ driver, Scala driver. That's the Spark connector, so maybe not. So depending on your language that you're using, but obviously the most popular ones: Python, Java, C#, Node, and Go. You should be able to connect to them, no problem. But if you do have any other questions, you can obviously consult the guru that is Google. And as long as there's some way that someone's done it, I'm sure you can use a different language to talk to it, as long as you have the right parameters and you have the cert file in your auth for your username and password.
All right. Thanks, Arpin. Any further questions? If not, we can go ahead and wrap up and give you guys about 5 minutes of your lunch back.
Have a great day, everyone.
Take care.
Thanks, Peter.
Yeah, you too.
All right, everyone. We will see you guys at Data Engineers Lunch on Monday, or same time, same place next week.
See ya.
Bye.